Welcome back. Election season is heating up and the polls are closer than ever. After Marquette University Law School poll dropped this week, voters are getting a better look at the attitudes in our state. CBS 58's Emilee Fannon and WisPolitics editor J.R. Ross break down the numbers in this week's Capital Connection.
We begin this week with oral arguments that were heard before the state Supreme Court on a case that could reshape how state government functions for centuries to come. Now, this is a lawsuit that was filed by Governor Tony Evers seeking to have the Joint Finance Committee restrict some of their powers to withhold funding for conservation projects, among some other things. And during oral arguments, we kind of got a little hint of how some of the liberal justices felt about this issue.
You hate to predict what judges are going to do or justices are going to do, but if you look at the questioning, three liberals were fairly skeptical of the arguments from Republicans. One of the justices heard an argument from a lawyer from Republicans saying, like, this is how we've done it for 100 years. And she said, well, what if we've been wrong for a century? Well, this is not the right way to do it. The fourth liberal justice, Janet Protasiewicz, a little quieter, asked a couple of questions, but it looks like there is at least some openness on that part of the court to the governor's arguments. This is all about the balance of power in the Capitol. Republicans found ways to frustrate Governor Evers since he took office 5 years ago. It's been no different with the way the Joint Finance is operating when it comes to stewardship purchases. Will this change that balance? Possibly, but it's not the end of the fight between those two branches of government.
All right, and moving on to our next topic, we have a new face in the 1st Congressional District, which is the southeastern part of Wisconsin. And we're talking about Peter Barca, who is a Democrat. He served nearly 2 decades here in the state legislature as a former minority leader and state lawmaker. He also had a short stint in Congress, so he's looking back to the seat that he previously held, and most recently job was Governor Evers' revenue secretary, and he stepped down that position to open up for a new campaign.
Look, it's like a new old face, essentially, in some ways.
It's well put, yes.
Look, Barca brings to the table for Democrats. They have not had a serious challenge with Brian Style really since he won the office in 2018. They need somebody to run well in southeastern Wisconsin because the top of the ticket, every vote matters. And that might seem kind of counterintuitive. Most of the time we hear talk about the top of the ticket, the presidential race, the governor's race, driving what's happening down ballot. Democrats have kind of come to feel like, look, Joe Biden's not lighting the world on fire with some people in our party. Could a challenge to Brian Style really help in that regard? What's been interesting is a group called Opportunity Wisconsin, a liberal group, has been doing ads against Style, a very healthy amount for the last year and a half, like they're waiting for somebody to come, a good candidate to come. Not to diminish the ones who are in the race already, but they haven't raised a lot of money. They're not very high profile. Now, Barca's starting from scratch, but he's got the backing of a lot of established Democrats. He's raised money before. He's kind of this Energizer bunny for somebody who's 68 around the Capitol. So he gives Democrats a legitimate candidate in a seat that, honestly, it leans Republican. Brian Style had $4 million in the bank at the end of March, the biggest war chest of anybody in the Wisconsin House delegation. He's a formidable candidate. He's run above the top of the ticket before. So Barca has a great shot, but he gives Democrats a legitimate challenger in this race, which could be important for him up the ballot.
It's definitely going to be a race that's interesting because last time Brian Style had a real competitor was, of course, when the first time he ran, which was in 2018 after former House Speaker Paul Ryan stepped down, and that was Randy Bryce, who was kind of a union worker, and that was a race that a lot of us watched, but Style, of course, won. Now we're going to look at the latest Marquette University Law School poll that came out earlier this week. Of course, this is just a glimpse, a snapshot of time of what's been happening here in the battleground state. When you look at the presidential race, President Joe Biden and the former president are locked in a dead, very tight race. Donald Trump has a slight edge with 51% over President Biden's 49%. Of course, when you throw independents in there, it kind of mixes it up a little bit. Trump has an 18-point advantage over Biden. Then looking at the first glimpse that we've had since Eric Hovde in the U.S. Senate race joined. Tammy Baldwin has about 52% over Eric Hovde, 47%. Of course, we'll get to the issues in a little bit, JR. But this is just a snapshot of time, but shows once again these are very tight races in the battleground state.
Look at the presidential race. When it's 51-49, Charles Franklin, director of the poll, is pushing undecideds to pick somebody. If you had to choose somebody right now, where would you get? Because I'm telling you right now in mid-April, they're undecideds whether they're going to vote for president, but when pushed, we get that. What's it show us? We're going to be purple again. Okay, no surprise. And the Senate race was interesting is, with registered voters, it's +5 for Baldwin. Among likely voters, it's tied. Now, you're asking likely voters in April. There's a lot going to happen now in November, so I'm not sure we got a good gauge of who's really going to turn out down the road, but it's a good headline for Hovde. He's pushing it out there. This race is tied. If you drill down a little bit, though, there are some warning signs for him. 56% of voters don't have an opinion of him. Now, we track ads at WisPolitics through Ad Impact. I've counted $5 million he had put on the air pretty much between getting in the race and this poll coming out of the field. Baldwin and her supporters spent a little more than that. It's a healthy amount of money, but not enough to move things dynamically. It's probably a reflection of partisanship. And Franklin brought this up, that when you're asking people, do you like Democrat Baldwin or Republican Hovde, they're going to their tribes essentially. That might be a reflection of that. But what I'm watching is that presidential race. You add the third party candidates, it goes to 41 Trump, 40 Biden, 19 everybody else. People I talk to doubt you're going to see 19% going for third parties come November. But where's that number end up, number one? And number two, in the Senate race, does Baldwin run ahead of Biden or Hovde ahead of Trump, or both, and by how much? That can decide things. This 51-49 race for the presidency might produce a 50-50 race for the Senate if that's how it turns out.
All right, and also looking at the issues too, the top three among voters that were polled in this, the economy, immigration, and abortion policy, and the top two, economy and immigration, were leading more towards Trump, whereas Biden is still banking on abortion policy, helping him come November. And also looking ahead to next week, we're going to get another visit from Vice President Kamala Harris. She will be in La Crosse on Monday. Of course, they're making, all attempts to try and come here to the battleground state. Meanwhile, Trump, he can't campaign that much because he has some legal trouble. So he'll likely make a return once all of that is situated. That will do it for this week. Thank you so much for joining us.